She was just another server to the room, until a glass of wine and a cruel laugh turned her into the evening's target. What no one expected was the phone call her daughter made that night, a call that would pull a millionaire into the dining hall and stop the city's elite cold. Stay with us, because what begins as a humiliation ends in a shock that silences the entire room. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever seen someone dismissed only to rise in a way no one could ignore? The Crystal Haven Hotel shimmered in Miami's humid night, a towering prism of glass where money spoke in hushed tones and elegance clung to every surface. Inside, the dining hall glowed with golden light from chandeliers that spilled their radiance like liquid fire across marble floors and crystal stemware. Music drifted faintly from a live quartet, notes of jazz threading themselves through the low murmur of voices and the delicate clink of silver against porcelain. It was a palace built on image, where guests wore their wealth like crowns and staff slipped between them like shadows. Among those shadows moved Simone Harris. At 42, she carried herself with the poise of someone who understood that dignity was armor. Her uniform, a fitted black dress with a starched white apron, clung to her tired frame, but her steps remained graceful, even as her feet throbbed inside flat shoes that had long since lost their cushioning. She knew the rhythm of this place better than the musicians did, the timing of the courses, the sway of the conversations, the exact pitch her voice needed to make even the most irritable guest feel indulged. Her skin caught the chandelier's glow, rich and luminous, yet it was the set of her shoulders and the steadiness of her gaze that gave her presence. Guests looked through her rather than at her, eyes sliding past her as though she were part of the decor. They noticed the poured wine, the folded napkin, but not the woman delivering them. And that invisibility, Simone had learned, was its own kind of cruelty. Still, she moved with quiet pride, because every plate balanced on her palm, every smile forced into existence, was not for the people who barely acknowledged her. It was for Layla, her daughter waiting at home with textbooks spread across a kitchen table scarred with years of second-hand use. Simone thought of her often during these shifts, 15, brilliant, restless, carrying the same fire that Simone buried beneath composure. Double shifts weren't a choice but a necessity, the only way to keep rent paid, school fees covered, and a future intact. As the night stretched on, Simone worked without pause, her body protesting, her mind steady. The air smelled of truffles and aged wine, perfumes clashing in invisible battles between tables. She endured it all in silence. No one saw the strength behind her calm expression, the sacrifices carved into her bones. To them, she was just another server. But within her chest, beneath the polished surface of routine, beat the relentless heart of a woman carrying the hidden weight of two lives, her own and her daughter's, through every shimmering, indifferent night. Layla Harris sat curled on the worn couch, the dim glow of the television flickering across her face, though she wasn't watching it. Her eyes stayed fixed on her phone, the cracked screen lighting up her features every few seconds as she refreshed the messages. It was almost habit now. Her mother always sent a quick text during her break, sometimes just a heart emoji, sometimes a reminder to lock the back door. But tonight, nothing. The minutes dragged, each one louder than the last, until the ticking of the kitchen clock felt like a hammer in her ears. She pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on them, and tried to steady her breathing. Simone was strong. Simone was always strong, but Layla knew strength came with a cost, and she had seen the toll it took. She had watched her mother return home with swollen feet, rubbing her ankles while pretending everything was fine. She had caught her staring off into the distance late at night when she thought Layla was asleep, shoulders sagging under weight she would never admit out loud. Layla hated that weight. hated how invisible her mother seemed to the world when to her, Simone was everything. She thought of the times she offered to help, maybe get a part-time job, maybe skip a few things at school to save money, but Simone always shook her head. "Your job is to be 15, she would say firmly, the kind of final word Layla had learned not to argue with. But tonight felt different. The silence pressed harder, carrying with it a whisper of dread that Layla couldn't explain. She tried to distract herself, scrolling through her feed, flipping through a homework assignment, but her mind kept circling back to her mother in that glittering hotel. Layla knew enough to picture it. Chandeliers throwing light like fire, people dressed in clothes worth more than their rent, and her mother moving among them as though she belonged, even when treated as if she didn't. She set her phone down for a moment, but the anxiety only grew sharper. What if something had happened? What if someone had crossed a line? Layla clenched her fists, a protective instinct burning in her chest. Simone could handle herself. She always had. But Layla couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was out there, alone, enduring something she shouldn't have to. And as the clock struck another hour with no word, fear curled tight around her resolve. If her mother wouldn't fight for herself, then maybe it was time someone else did. The clatter of cutlery faded into an uneasy quiet, a ripple of discomfort passing from table to table as eyes turned toward the scene. Simone stood perfectly still, the chilled wine soaking into the fabric of her blouse, dripping down to the hem of her apron. The sharp tang of Cabernet filled the air, sour and heavy, its stain blooming across her uniform like a wound. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire dining hall had forgotten how to breathe. Monica St. James leaned back in her chair, lips curling into a smirk that revealed not embarrassment, not even indifference, but satisfaction. She twirled the stem of her empty glass between her fingers, as though what she had done was a game and Simone merely the pawn, unlucky enough to be caught in her play. Her green eyes glittered in the chandelier's glow, daring anyone to object. No one did. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing away as though avoiding responsibility might erase the cruelty they had just witnessed. Others, bolder or perhaps more entertained, held their gazes steady, watching the drama unfold like theater. Simone's breath caught in her throat, but her expression did not falter. Years of endurance had taught her how to hold her ground when pride tried to slip away. She lifted her chin slightly, her hands steady despite the damp chill pressing against her skin. "I'll fetch you another," she said quietly, the words clipped, efficient, refusing to break into apology. But Monica wasn't finished. She laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that echoed across the hall. "Another? Darling, what you need is another career. Honestly, do they let anyone work here?" Her voice rang out clear and cruel, meant not just for Simone, but for every ear in the room. Her companion at the table, a younger woman in sequins, gave a nervous giggle, though her eyes darted to the side, uneasy. Heat rose under Simone's skin, not from humiliation, but from the effort of restraint. She had been through worse. She knew the sting of disrespect, the suffocating weight of being unseen. But rarely was it so deliberate, so public. Around her, the hall remained in suspension, a room full of witnesses pretending not to be. With a measured inhale, Simone straightened her shoulders and stepped back, dignity intact even as her uniform clung to her like a brand. Monica's smirk lingered, a declaration of victory. Yet beneath the hush, a tension began to stir, unseen but gathering, like the first rumble of a storm that had only just been invited in. The fluorescent lights in the staff station hummed faintly, a harsh contrast to the golden glow of the dining hall. Simone stood by the sink, blotting at her blouse with a damp towel, the deep red stain spreading stubbornly across the fabric. Each press of the cloth only seemed to push the color deeper, a reminder she couldn't wash away. Her hands were steady, but her chest tightened with every breath. She would not cry. She had promised herself long ago that no guest, no matter how cruel, would have the power to strip her of that dignity. Her phone buzzed on the counter, its cracked screen lighting up with Layla's name. For a moment, Simone considered ignoring it. She didn't want her daughter to hear the break in her voice, to sense the weight she tried so carefully to hide. But the thought of Layla waiting alone at home, watching the clock, gnawed at her. With a reluctant swipe, she answered. "Mom?" Layla's voice came sharp, urgent. "Too old for 15. Why didn't you text me?" "What's wrong?" Simone tried to sound even, but the tremor betrayed her. "I'm fine, baby. Just busy." "You're not fine," Layla snapped back. Her breath hitched, and Simone could hear the restless pacing on the other end. "Tell me." There was no stopping it. The truth slipped out in a whisper. "A guest. She spilled wine on me." On purpose, Simone closed her eyes, hating the admission, hating even more the silence that followed. When Layla spoke again, her voice shook with anger. "She humiliated you, didn't she?" "It doesn't matter," Simone replied quickly. "It's part of the job. I'll handle it." But Layla wasn't listening. Her fingers moved fast, scrolling through her contacts until she reached the number she almost never touched. It sat like a secret in her phone, a relic of promises her mother wished never to keep. Simone had told her not to call him unless there was no other choice, unless it was life or death. Layla's thumb hovered over the screen, her heart racing. She thought of her mother's voice, thin and strained, of the endless sacrifices she endured in silence. Enough was enough. With a deep breath, she pressed call. On the other end of the line, a ring echoed into the night, reaching a man who had been absent far too long. And for the first time in years, the distance between them began to crack. Miles Carter lifted the phone to his ear, his voice a measured baritone shaped by boardrooms and negotiations. "Layla," he said, though he already knew. Her voice, trembling and urgent, carried all the echoes of Simone's, the same cadence, the same fire beneath restraint. Layla spoke quickly, her words spilling out between shallow breaths. She told him everything, how her mother had been soaked in wine, how the woman had laughed, how Simone had tried to brush it off as if humiliation was just another line in the job description. For years, Miles had built walls inside himself as carefully as he built towers across the city. Estrangement had not been born of malice, but of pride, of stubborn silence when he and Simone's paths had split. He told himself she didn't need him, that she was stronger without the shadow of his fortune. Yet hearing his daughter's voice break under the weight of what had been done, those walls cracked. Fury surged through him, not the kind that burned out quickly, but the cold, sharpened rage of a man used to controlling outcomes. He rose from his leather chair, the skyline of Miami glittering beyond the glass wall of his office. It was late, but he moved with a purpose that startled even himself. "Stay calm, Layla," he said softly. "Your mother won't face this alone." On the other end, Layla bit her lip, torn between fear and relief. "She didn't want me to call," she whispered. "She said not unless it was life or death." Miles's jaw tightened. "And what she went through tonight qualifies." He didn't wait for her to answer. He ended the call gently, slipping the phone into his pocket as he grabbed his jacket. The driver, startled to see his employer descending the marble steps so late, straightened immediately. Miles said nothing more than the destination, Crystal Haven. His voice carried the weight of finality. The car surged forward, cutting through the night as Miles stared out the tinted glass, his reflection superimposed over the glittering city he had built piece by piece. For years, he had stayed away, telling himself distance was protection. But tonight, distance was betrayal. And as the lights blurred past, one thought anchored in his chest like stone. Whoever had dared humiliate Simone Harris in his absence was about to learn that silence had its limits, and his had just been broken. The dining hall of Crystal Haven had never known silence like this. The chandeliers still shimmered, the quartet still played, but every note seemed to stumble. Every laugh died mid-breath as Miles Carter strode across the marble floor. His presence bent the air itself, measured steps, shoulders squared, his tailored navy suit catching the gold light like steel polished for battle. Heads turned, whispers raced, and even those who didn't know his face felt the pull of authority in the room. He wasn't a man who asked for attention, he commanded it. Monica St. James shifted in her seat, her smirk faltering as Miles's shadow fell across her table. For a fleeting second she looked triumphant, mistaking his approach as validation, as if the universe itself had sent someone to reinforce her importance. Her fingers adjusted the diamond at her throat, her green eyes brightening with expectation. But Miles didn't look at her. His gaze slid past Monica's self-satisfied smile and landed squarely on Simone, who stood near the service station, still damp from humiliation, but upright in a way that made her seem untouchable. "Simone," he said, his voice carrying not just across the room but into its bones. It was not a scolding, not pity. It was reverence, layered with recognition that left the room gasping. The sound of her name on his lips sliced through the hush like thunder. Simone froze, her breath catching as her eyes flickered to his, disbelief colliding with memory. For years, she had trained herself to endure alone, to move quietly in a world that rarely noticed her. And here was Miles, father to her daughter, absent yet undeniable, placing her at the center of the stage she never asked for. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some recognized him instantly. The man who had reshaped half the skyline, whose name was inked on contracts and tower facades. Others, unfamiliar, pieced it together from the odd whispers. Miles Carter, millionaire, power broker, and now, defender. Monica shifted again, unease crawling across her features. She straightened in her chair, ready to interject, but the weight of Miles's gaze kept her silent. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was carved in the calm, in the way the room itself seemed to wait for his next words. And in that pause, one truth rang clear to everyone watching. The night no longer belonged to cruelty. It belonged to reckoning. Monica's laugh rang out brittle, forced, like glass cracking under pressure. She tossed her hair back, her emerald dress shimmering as if fabric alone could protect her, and said loudly enough for the nearby tables, "It was just an accident. People are so sensitive these days." Her words wavered, though, thin threads fraying against the silence that pressed in on her. The socialite's practiced charm, the armor she had worn into countless rooms, seemed to wilt under the steadiness of Miles Carter's gaze. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "An accident doesn't laugh," he said evenly, each word dropping like a verdict. "An accident doesn't mock. An accident doesn't humiliate a woman doing her job." The room held its breath, diners leaning forward, the weight of his clarity slicing through the haze of luxury and entitlement. Monica's companion shifted uncomfortably, sliding her chair back as if distance might erase association. Staff members froze mid-step, trays trembling in their hands, all eyes fixed on the scene unraveling at the prime table. A few phones tilted subtly upward, recording in shaky hands, capturing every syllable, every crack in Monica's facade. The cameras didn't make her powerful tonight. They made her small, caught in the glare of accountability. Simone stood at the edge of the light, her damp blouse clinging, her hands still faintly stained, yet her posture radiated something stronger than defiance. She didn't gloat, didn't speak. She simply existed in the moment as the center of its gravity. Guests saw it too. The contrast between Monica's unraveling performance and Simone's quiet, unwavering dignity. Monica's smile twitched, her eyes darting for allies among the wealthy crowd, but none came. Some guests avoided her gaze entirely, ashamed to have been complicit in silence. Others stared directly, their expressions sharp with disapproval. The applause started softly, almost uncertain. A man in the corner clapping twice before others followed. Then more joined, the rhythm spreading until the hall echoed not with music, but with measured approval. It wasn't raucous. It wasn't showy. It was honest, a release of breath from people who had watched cruelty and now saw it named for what it was. Monica's beauty faltered under it. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she shrank into her chair, desperate to disappear. And amid the steady rhythm of hands meeting hands, Simone did not move, did not bend. She stood, the quiet heart of the storm, and for the first time all night, she was seen. The night air outside Crystal Haven was thick with the scent of salt and city heat, but to Simone it felt like release. The gilded doors closed behind her, muffling the echoes of applause and whispers, leaving only the hum of traffic and the soft call of the ocean carried in on the breeze. She spotted Layla immediately, leaning against the stone railing with her arms wrapped tight around herself, her cracked phone clutched in her hand. The girl's eyes found her mother's wine-stained blouse, and for a moment, fear shadowed her expression. But then relief broke through, fierce and unyielding, and she rushed forward. Simone bent slightly, catching her daughter in an embrace that held every ounce of exhaustion and every measure of strength she had left. Layla buried her face in her shoulder, whispering, "I couldn't stay home. I had to be here." Simone smoothed her hand over her daughter's curls, a soft smile trembling at the corners of her lips. "You shouldn't have had to see that," she murmured. "And you shouldn't have had to live it," Layla answered, her voice stronger than her years. Before Simone could reply, Miles stepped into the glow of the street lamps. He didn't come forward as the man whose name commanded headlines or the figure whose empire stretched across the city skyline. He came as something rarer, a man stripped of titles, standing in front of the family he had watched from too far away. His eyes, dark as midnight steel, softened when they fell on Simone. There was no pity in them, only pride, tempered by regret. "You handled it with more grace than anyone could have," he said quietly. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a declaration for others to hear. It was for her, meant to acknowledge what the world had just witnessed. Her strength was not borrowed from him. It was entirely her own. Layla reached for her mother's hand, gripping tightly, then extended her other hand toward her father. For the briefest moment, Miles hesitated, as though uncertain he had the right. But when Layla's fingers curled around his, the hesitation broke. Simone's gaze lifted, meeting his, and though the years of distance did not vanish, something shifted. Above them, Miami's skyline glittered in fractured diamonds, not as symbols of power, but as quiet witnesses. Together, hand in hand, they stood not as strangers separated by pride, but as a family beginning again, dignity reclaimed, love rediscovered, and the fragile, necessary promise of rising together. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there knows what it means to see their parents suffer in silence and would give anything to protect them. Comment below if you've ever found courage not for yourself, but for the person you love most. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where family becomes the strongest shield of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.